healing, dreaming, believing, manifesting, pivoting. Welcome to Pivot's Pulse Podcast.
Welcome to Pivot's Pulse Podcast. I'm Lynne Penn-Leon, Executive Clinical Director. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, our professional community of therapists who deal with mental health conditions as well. And as a trauma survivor, I understand this very, very well in going through my own healing. So I wanted to have Elizabeth Suellentrop to come on to this podcast today, because when we go through our own healing process, it equips us with skill sets that can really help our clients as we're moving through theirs. I really appreciate you bringing this to the forefront and wanting to do a podcast on this today. So I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of a background on what your experience has been as far as the stigma around being a clinical social worker who has had some struggles in your life.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So what I experienced was it was from stigma, but it was more of a code of silence. The entire time in my MSW program, no one mentioned anything about having their own mental health struggles except once, and it wasn't shared in class. And the teachers never shared anything like that. And it was just this like, oh, we don't talk about this. And I think that's damaging. And I think it's dangerous. And I think it negatively impacts our clients.
And I know when working with clients that if they understand that you have that unspoken language, they're more willing to connect with you in that way and to be able to open up a lot more freely. Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. I definitely do. You know, it's funny because just yesterday, a client said, I didn't expect you to be so relatable. And, I said, well, that's my style. I can't relate to every experience, but I can relate to a lot because of my own experiences with mental health struggles. And I think it's important to talk about those things, with clients as well as with the world, like we're doing here, because I think it's really important that clients understand that this is a judgment-free zone. You can tell me anything. I will not judge you. I might have to report you if you tell me you've, committed a crime, especially against a child, but I won't judge you. I've worked with all kinds of people, including jail diversion programs for batterers, and I don't judge them. I saw them as just people. And I think it's important to understand that, I'm a person, they're a person. I've had my own struggles, and I think it's important that we talk about that in a professional capacity.
I think one thing that happens very often, in the therapeutic, world, when a client comes in for therapy, they oftentimes feel like, the therapist is up here and they're down here. And I know at Pivots, we're very much in the position of making our work that we do is very relationship based and collaborative so that the clients are not feeling that way. And that's why they get the most out of the work that they do with us. So, I really see that happening. So for you specifically, are you, can you share a little bit about your mental health struggles?
I'm also a trauma survivor, and I have struggled with depression and anxiety, since I was a child. And then when I was older, quite a bit older, when I was 35, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And, I had kind of a unique experience because most people aren't diagnosed that late in life. And looking back, I realized I had my first manic episode when I was 23. but it was a reaction to steroids. And so everybody just kind of said, oh, it's just a reaction to the medication. And then I later learned that you only have that reaction when you have the disorder. It was a really long, tough road to recovery. I was not in a position to work. I filed for disability. Once it wasn't approved, I realized, okay, I'm going to have to go back to work. I wasn't interested in counseling until a therapist recommended it. And then I did peer counseling, got my certification, and then thought, I think I want to go back to school. And social work was appealing to me because of that desire to reduce the power imbalance between provider and client. We can't completely erase it, and it's important we acknowledge that and take responsibility for it. But like you said, and I had a professor who said, it's a relationship like any other. And, in relationships, we get to know each other, creating an environment of safety. Because I think that's, if clients don't feel safe, they're not going to share. I share my experiences. I talk about my own recovery. I tell them, recovery is possible. Your path isn't going to look the same as mine, but here's some things that work for me. What are some things that you think might, work for you? And I just think that's so important. And I've learned more about mental illness from my own experience and from the experience of other people. I was a member of a lot of groups, support groups and also online groups of, some of my conditions. And I learned so much more than I ever learned in school, and you just can't replace that. And I think it's just really true. I think it was Michael J. Fox that said, we have to remember that the people with the condition are the experts. I would really, really like if more practitioners felt comfortable talking about those experiences and talking about how it's an asset. It doesn't detract from what we do. It helps us. It helps our clients. They feel comfortable, they feel safe, they feel understood, they feel validated, empathized with. And I feel like that's the whole point.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here today. And if you have any closing comments, I would love to hear that.
Glad to be here. I'm honored to be here and get a chance to talk about this really important topic. And I think if I had any closing thoughts, it would be for fellow providers, and it would be, please also focus on your own healing. I've learned that the hard way, which, Lynn, all about, and I just think that's really important. And also I'd like to emphasize that it's an asset, not a liability.